Hi guys, welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing a review and excerpt reading of The Red Queen's Daughter by Jacqueline Kolosov. This is a historical slight fantasy. I wouldn't call it high fantasy, but it does have fantastical elements. And it is based in the Elizabethan era, England. And because of that, I'm actually going to be reading the excerpt in my best British accent. I am a theatre major, so I have had some dialect training, so I do think that it won't be too terrible. But I just thought it would be a fun little thing to do to sort of change it up. And I do know that accents can be a pretty good trigger for some people. So I will do my best to read The Red Queen's Daughter in a British accent. So to start off, I would like to read the back summary. So it says, orphaned as a baby because of the imprudent marriage of her mother, Queen Catherine Parr, Mary Seymour believes that romantic love clouds even the strongest woman's ability to reason. Therefore, she vows never to fall in love, and under no circumstances will she marry. Lady Strange, her mysterious guardian, offers the young woman an extraordinary alternative to marriage. Mary is to become a white magician who will join Queen Elizabeth's court and ensure the success of the Virgin Queen's reign. Accompanied by her magical hound Perseus, Mary sets out to learn the properties of different stones and the art of precision of natural spells. Soon after her 16th birthday, she is invited to join Elizabeth's court as a lady-in-waiting. Upon her arrival, Mary realizes that Elizabeth's court is rife with men and women who are vying for power. The most dangerous of all is Edmund Seymour, Mary's disturbingly handsome cousin. From the moment she meets Edmund, Mary has to fight her growing attraction, especially once she discovers that he is a black magician, the dark mirror of her own self. But despite the threat Edmund poses to Mary, he seems to be the only one who truly understands her. And when Edmund becomes involved in a plot against the Queen, Mary finds her beliefs tested in ways she never could have imagined. So, this book is a bit old. It was published in 2007, which is quite a long time ago. But I actually just read it not too long ago. I'll show you guys here in the front. I included a handy little family tree for the Tudors and the Seymours, which is always very useful because in these times there was a lot of intermarriage and cousins married cousins and siblings married siblings sometimes, so the family trees get very muddied. Before I give you my review, I'm going to go ahead and read the excerpt again in my best British accent. So don't be too harsh on me. Prologue. December 17th, 1557. The bitter cold day before they buried the Duchess. Even after so many years, I can still see my 9-year-old self standing among the shadows in the great hall at Grimsthorpe, where the Duchess's body had been laid out for a final viewing. With her white hands folded over her small belly, and her golden tresses arranged around her porcelain face, my late mother's best friend looked as if she was sleeping, not dead. I almost expected her to wake from her nap and ask me to stitch some clothes for her lover, or mend a bit of finery on one of her gowns. What will become of me now? Since my guardian's death 3 days earlier, this single question had reverberated through my mind. Although the Duchess had spent very little time with me during the last few months, I could not ignore the fact that she had been the only one to claim me from my gloomy nursery at Sadelli Castle. I may have been the daughter of the late Queen Catherine Parr, who had died 6 days after giving birth to me, but I was also the child of Thomas Seymour, the treasonous courtier executed on Tower Hill when I was 8 months old. After his execution, the Crown seized all of my mother's remaining properties and her wealth, and I, the sole heir, a child who had once slept on satin sheets in a bed of canopied velvet, suddenly found myself penniless and alone. Not even the Duchess, who had fallen dangerously in love with the handsome master of the horse who cared for her thoroughbreds, could explain why my mother had trysted with Thomas Seymour in the moonlit gardens of Chelsea Manor after Henry VIII's death. Not even the Duchess, who lost her life in a riding accident after she crashed into a tree because she was staring deep into that same master of the horse's eyes, could explain why my well-born, well-educated mother gave up her properties, her jewels, and most of all, her stainless reputation in order to marry my father. I knew my father had married my mother to better his own fortunes. How could I have concluded anything less when I had stood visiting his grave, a chill drizzle dampening my skin and hair just months before? As I held tightly to the Duchess's hand, I listened to her read to me the words, my father's own words, carved into the headstone. Love is but a frailty of mind when 'tis not to ambition joined. After we returned home, the epitaph continued to linger in my memory. Why were those words written on my father's grave? I asked, once the Duchess and I had sat down to dinner of roast quail, and potatoes. The Duchess focused her sorrowful, cornflower blue eyes on me and said, "Because your father lived by these words, Mary. He never acted without first considering how an event would benefit him." Even when he asked my mother to marry him? Even then? The Duchess wiped the tears from her eyes, for she inevitably fell to weeping whenever she spoke of my mother. What you are too young to understand is that your father was not just courting a woman when he asked your mother to be his wife. He was courting Henry VIII's widow. Provided that he did not lose his head, your father knew that in marrying your mother, he would rise in power and in influence, not to mention in wealth. So my mother was nothing more than a prize. No, Mary, your father's intentions were more complicated than that, and yet I'm afraid I cannot call them honourable. Why? I said. Such stories are not fit for a child. Please tell me, I said, and I grabbed hold of her hand, hoping to impress upon her why I now so desperately needed to know what my parents' lives together had been like. For a few moments the Duchess hesitated, but then something within her overruled her misgivings, and she said, "Because, after Henry VIII's death, your father tried to marry the king's youngest daughter, the Princess Elizabeth." A strange tingling coursed through me as I spoke her name. The Duchess nodded. "You mean my mother was not the first choice?" "I'm afraid not, child." She tried to draw me close, but I pulled away. "The princess refused my father, didn't she?" I said, suddenly understanding why a sorrowful sort of rage always simmered in the Duchess's voice when some visitor mentioned Thomas Seymour's name, for the Duchess herself almost never spoke of him. "Yes." "So he began courting my mother?" "He did." "Did my mother know this?" I said, forcing myself to hold the Duchess's gaze. "Not until much later," she said softly. Once the Princess Elizabeth came to live with them, your mother knew your father had designs on Elizabeth. But by that time, your mother was pregnant with you. By that time, it was too late. Following this discovery, I lost my appetite and ceased playing out of doors. It was not long before all colour vanished from my cheeks. few days later, I appeared in the Duchess's room wearing a dress I had outgrown the summer before, a dress that once more fit perfectly. Only then did she bring forth from a secret compartment of her wardrobe a packet of my mother's letters, which someone had tied together with a silk ribbon. "I'm telling you about your father, I'm afraid." "Oh, in telling you about your father. I'm afraid I might have said too much," the Duchess said, once we found ourselves sitting side by side on her great bed. "Although I cannot lie, your parents' marriage came to no good. You must always remember that your mother loved your father with the very best part of herself. Do you understand, Mary?" When I shook my head, the Duchess sighed, then opened one of the letters and read aloud to me my mother's words. "My lord, I can require nothing more than I have. Your heart and your goodwill during this life." "Your father's heart," the Duchess said again, as if through repetition she could impress upon me the meaning of these words. "That is what your mother wanted. That is why she married Thomas Seymour. Having been married to 3 old men before she met your father, she was hungry for love, Mary. For love she sacrificed everything, which is why I now find you in my care." That December afternoon, as I stood in the great hall, one last time holding the Duchess's now cold hand, newly aware that yet another woman had lost all to love, I had no doubt that it was my mother's love for my father that had cost her not just influence, wealth, and admiration. Love had cost my mother her very life. So that was the prologue, and I think that gives you a very good overview of kind of a running theme of the novel, which is the main character's resistance to love, which is one of the main things that she sort of overcomes or has to tackle. And I also think it gives us a good historical setting for where this novel takes place and what events historically it succeeds from. So this novel, I have thoughts on it. I didn't hate it. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it. I would say I enjoyed it. Definitely. It was a very quick read, as you can see. The writing is I don't know why the way it's formatted is very small on the page. The letters, the sentences are very spaced out. And I think I read it in 2 days, if that. Probably not even 2 full days. So it's a very quick read, and for someone who I love the Elizabethan era. I think it's a very colorful time in not just British history, but world history. There was certainly a lot going on. And I think anyone who wants to set a story in that time certainly has so much to pull from. And I actually really liked that the author basically gave a daughter that historically does not exist to Catherine Parr. Because Mary Seymour, who is the main character of the novel, we obviously have no record of her, so she's a fictional person, but the setting that she lives in is very real. She gets sent to Queen Elizabeth's court, as it was mentioned in the summary, and I just always like to read people's interpretations of what life would have been like in Queen Elizabeth's court, because I imagine it was quite eventful, as Elizabeth's entire reign was. So writing-wise, I loved the writing, as you could kind of get from that snippet. It was very elegant, very eloquent, flowed very well, and certainly fit to build the essence of the time period. I think that's a big one with historical novels in general, whether they're fantasy or not. We definitely need the actual cadence of the writing to sort of transport us back in time. And I think that Jacqueline Kolosov did that quite well. One thing, I guess a couple of things that I'm not too keen on with the novel. First, the romance. In the summary, it mentions Edmund Seymour, who is Mary's cousin. Again, marrying cousins in this time, or courting them, whatever the case may be, was not seen as strange. It was very par for the course. So I think even as the reader, where that's something that is strange for our time period, you can sort of suspend your disbelief for a little bit and realize that we are in Elizabethan England, and it doesn't really bother you. It's not really too much of an issue, honestly. However, the romance, I felt I never got the chemistry. I think that's a big one for me as a lover of romance, the genre, and I think if you're going to include a romance subplot in your story, that you really got to work on that chemistry. Even though the romance was not the main aspect of the story, it feels useless if you can't get the proper, chemistry going to where we as the reader go, oh yes, this feels totally natural. This is a natural progression of the story. I didn't hate it. I just wasn't very keen on it. It's one of those things where I was a little apathetic while I was reading not the love scenes, because there was nothing really out there with romance, but just the scenes of Mary and Edmund together. I never really got anything out of them. I did like and would have wanted to see a little more of the actual fantasy aspects of it. So Mary turns out to be a white magician, as is mentioned in the summary. And this basically means it does follow very, I guess, what is the word? A very Elizabethan idea of magic. It's not like, Harry Potter magic, where it's like, oh, I wave a wand and I do this. This is very much almost alchemy in a way of, taking items and combining them to create something else, or I don't quite know how to explain it, but it was very practical magic. It wasn't like fantastical magic, like Harry Potter magic, as I just kind of I like to reference things that everyone should have like a collective understanding of, and I feel like Harry Potter is a good jumping point for a lot of people. So in terms of like magic, it's not that. It's very subdued, very toned down. I would have actually liked to see more of an exploration of that. We get very little of it. It's an undercurrent in the entire novel, definitely. I always struggle kind of to do reviews without giving spoilers. It is something that Mary works on throughout the entire novel, but I feel like I wanted to see a progression of her from very amateur white magician to like powerful white magician, and we never got that. I feel like we just went from A to B and it was just like, oh, okay, we're here, and it's never like, okay, well, how did we get here, which is okay. It's not the worst thing in the world. Again, this is let's see, this is how many pages? This is a 399, so 400-page novel. Like I said, it sounds long, but it's actually quite short just because of the way that the actual text is formatted on the page. Very quick read. So yeah, when it comes to the fantasy aspect, I definitely would like to see a little more, but overall, if I had to give it a star rating out of 5 stars, I would give it a 3. It was a good read. It wasn't super solid in everything, but it stood up sort of to the test. And I think I'd recommend it for people who like historical fiction, specifically the Elizabethan era, and who sort of want to have a little extra on top of it with the fantasy elements. If that's something that interests you, definitely check out The Red Queen's Daughter. I will have links below. As always, it will be an affiliate link, so if you do click on it and buy, I do get a small commission. That goes really just to upkeep this channel and make it better, because right now my setup is not best, and I would really like to bring you guys good quality content. And on that note, I would really like to know what kind of triggers you guys would like to see moving forward in these book reviews. I try to get some page turning and some tapping and some cover, rubbing, but if there's something specific that you'd like to see, please let me know. I would love to create what you guys want to see. So that's my review and excerpt for The Red Queen's Daughter by Jacqueline Kolosov. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you enjoyed, and I will see you guys again soon.